part of the point of being in this dimension is to understand our responsibility of creation, and part of that understanding comes from being able to call on the help of these guides and other spiritual beings and aspects of creation, aspects of nature, understanding that actually they are a part of us and we are a part of them, and there is no separation whatsoever.
Tim Walter, welcome to Passion Harvest.
Thank you for having me. It's wonderful.
I just said before this interview, I love everything you do and how it's evolved. But for the audience, I'd love to start with, you moved from a big career and moved house and discovered a female entity, a ghost energy in your home that introduced you to the concept of earth energy.
Yeah, it doesn't sound believable, does it?
No.
When you hear it back, it sounds like a movie or something in itself. No, that's fundamentally what happened in 1998. My family and I moved house. We were living in the very crowded southeast of England, and it was just getting completely unbearable, really. Just too much going on in the world that we were living in. So we decided to move across country and go to the Welsh borders, and we bought this amazing old Georgian townhouse that needed a lot of work doing to it. And moving in there, we met the spirit of a deceased lady, basically. And that meeting completely changed our lives, completely changed my life, probably more so than my boys or my wife. But I was working as a video producer and conference producer and this sort of thing. And in meeting this disincarnate entity, which sounds a bit of an odd way to describe her. I mean, we would call her a ghost to start with, and we can maybe talk a little bit about what a ghost is, what a spirit is, and this sort of thing. But in meeting her, and having a conversation, we were introduced to her by several dowsers that came to the house and basically said, look, you've got this issue with earth energy lines, and there's a guardian here that is, wanting to be part of the family, and she's been looking after these lines for you and protecting you from their energy, as it were. And in that conversation, so much changed. It was such a short conversation, but so much changed. And this whole sort of spiritual path, I suppose, if you want to be a little bit kind of pompous about it, is the what's happened since then, since that point. And it introduced a way of seeing the world that is so utterly and completely different to how I'd experienced up to that point. So yeah.
Interesting. So I'm talking in my humanness here. Did you see this earthbound energy with your physical eyes?
No, she was very much, it was a bizarre experience from that point of view, in terms of just anybody that had been in the room that was not sort of party to what was going on would have seen three ladies, a young lad that came with those ladies. They all had dowsing rods. So basically, dowsing rods are these sort of things. I'm sure your listeners, viewers will know about them. So they basically respond to yes and no responses. So anybody looking in would have seen those three ladies and the young lad standing there with rods, and then there was my wife and I standing there looking completely bemused, I'm sure, because I had no feeling of the entity, the guardian energy, the ghost, who we end up calling Jane, basically because that's who she was when she was incarnate. I had no feeling about her. I had no impression of her at all at that stage. But because fundamentally we lived with her for 15 years, that whole kind of side of things, that sensitivity to the subtle realms, changed completely. So, these days I'm aware when she's around, like she is now.
So you're still in the house?
No, interesting.
She followed you?
Yes, that's another aspect of the story. Yes, she was introduced to us as a guardian energy of that particular place. And when we go to sacred sites, such as Neolithic stone circles or anything like that. So over here we've got sites like Avebury or Stonehenge, if you want, but Avebury's a much better site, subjective term of reference. But it's a much more interesting site. And so you go to a site like that, and you've always got a guardian energy that's present. Now, Jane was the guardian energy that was present for the space in our house, for the energy flows that were in our house. And as such, you think, well, okay, so that guardian energy is allocated to that space. As it turned out, Jane in particular was not just tied to that space. In the 15 years that we lived in that house, she did take a brief period of time, and I honestly can't remember how long it was, but she took a brief period of time where she left and a different energy came in and took her place. And she'd told me some days, I think it was a couple of days beforehand, she said, right, I'm going to be going soon, but somebody else will be coming in to take over. And I'm like, what's going on? You can't just leave us. But she did. So this other energy came in. Now, and then this other energy came in. There was a male energy. It was a very different energy. And by that time, I could, feel this sort of difference in subtle energies a bit clearer than I could right at the start. So that energy was with us for a while, and then one day they changed again and Jane returned. And so we finished off the last few years of living in that house with Jane as the guardian energy present. And my wife and I used to go down and talk to her in the room that she used to hang out in. And although she had access, she went all over the house and everything, there was always Jane's room. So she had a chair in there, and she basically stayed in that space. Now, when we left the house and we moved to a different part of the country, we're now living in the Yorkshire Dales rather than the Forest of Dean, which is where we used to live. I was meditating one day fairly soon after moving up to the north, and there was a familiar feeling, a familiar presence that came to me. And I thought, well, Jane, is that you? And yes, it was. So she is now part of what I call the healing team. So in other words, the entities that work in the subtle realms. When a client comes to me for house healing, Jane is quite often involved in working on that house as well as part of the energy that is, affecting change.
Of course, I'm thinking in my humanness, there's no distance between, time and space. Oh my gosh, I've got so many questions for you. First, I'm just thinking, talking about dowsing rods, I have some somewhere in the house. I have to find them. Rory Duff introduced them to me, who's been on the show. I absolutely love Rory. He's amazing. I didn't realize that, we assume dowsing rods are essentially to find water on the land or gold, or people like to find all sorts of things. I didn't realize they could be used to find energies within a home.
So dowsing, people usually come to dowsing, they usually become aware of dowsing in connection with finding water. Now, I spent a lot of time to start with using it to just speak to Jane, to communicate with her. And really, for so long, I'd actually forgotten that it was used for finding anything or for doing anything else apart from speaking to dead people, because that's what I was doing. That's what I was using it for. And I started to explore sacred sites more. And when I went to sacred sites, because I knew about the presence of Jane, the guardian energy, I would always ask to speak to the guardian energy of those sites. So I literally was just using dowsing as this way of communicating with deceased people. Basically, dowsing as a technique can be used for absolutely anything, for finding anything that is not in the three-dimensional visible realms. So whatever you want, you just tune into what you're looking for and you ask the questions. When you're having a conversation with a deceased person or a guardian energy, what you're basically doing is just really holding the rods and allowing them to free flow, and they will continue to give yes and no responses. They're doing that now because I'm talking to you and they're affirming that, yes, this is correct. But they're doing that, and all the time that the conversation is basically on point, they'll remain in a positive kind of, yes and no. If you start to lose the connection completely, then they'll go to that one fell out of my hand, but they'll go to a no. And that means, you as somebody that is not terribly sensitive in terms of channeling and mediumship, dowsing is a brilliant way just to connect and to see that you actually, oh yeah, we've got this established, this established link going on. That's the simplest way that I put it.
That's amazing. Oh my gosh, I have to find them. They're somewhere in my house.
You definitely should.
Well, I wanted to douse dragon lines and energy lines and so many things, but life got in the way. I've heard that earthbound spirits are not necessarily positive. So if you don't mind explaining the difference between ghosts and spirits for the audience. And I just wanted to say most of our audience is US, and if they don't get your accent, you're in the UK. So
Yeah, that's fine. A lot of my clients actually are in the US, but yes, a lot of them do comment on that's a you know what's that accent from? Where's that from? So yeah, okay. So the reason I'm pausing is because actually in the house healing modality, in the framework that we use when we're exploring the space for somebody in order to help them shift a point of their their reality, what we tend to do is to look at ghosts, spirits, and trapped souls, and then you go into the guardian aspects as well. So these are all sort of different aspects of the non-incarnate form of I mean, basically, we're the incarnate form of as a human being. A ghost tends to be almost like a recording that is within the ether of the space. So the physical dimension is built from the quantum layer, and I'm sure that your audience is aware of what quantum physics is about. It's about dealing with that energy that basically forms at the smallest of the smallest dimensions, and it comes out and the physical world is formed from that kind of layer, and we come up in vibration, right? So a ghost will be a kind of trapped recording in that kind of layer of dimension. It's not really the astral. I'm tempted to say astral, but that's getting a little bit. Let's not get too technical about these definitions, but it's closer to the quantum than we are, right? To because we're here in the physical. Our awareness is here in the physical. So a ghost can be simply dealt with by interacting with it, and as soon as a person interacts with it with the intention of allowing that energy to dissipate for the recording to stop, then what will happen is the recording stops and the ghost disappears. I'll give you an example. Did some work on a fella's house where at midnight he was getting 3 knocks on the door every night. This 3 knocks would happen at midnight. He would go to the door, and of course there was nobody there, and it was spooking him out. So that was okay, fair enough. He was a bit freaked out by it. But when I looked at the energy of his house and what was going on at the doorway there was somebody that was coming to the door to give news about the fact that one of a loved one had died in the First World War. So they were coming to the doorway to tell the I think, I can't remember whether it was the wife of of the person that had died, but there was an emotion laden in that moment of transmitting the communication, knock on the door, speak to this woman to tell her that her husband or boyfriend had died. So there's a huge amount of impact in that emotional point. That is what had got left stuck in that space, but it created the ghost because somebody that was more sensitive than the guy that was living there probably would have seen somebody knocking on the door to deliver the news, right? So that's a ghost. A spirit is something slightly more different. It's not just something that is trapped within the energy of the space. It's got far more flexibility and free will, and it's a spirit energy that's coming through and communicate with us. They're fine. But there are also aspects of the lower energies like guilt and fear that will also keep a spirit trapped in this space. Those sort of spirits are not helpful to have around. They're not harmonious. They're not beneficial to the individual occupant of the space, for obvious reasons, because they're energy draining. And then you get onto a different classification about guardians and all of that sort of stuff as well. But the ghosts and spirits, that's your basic sort of definition as far as I'm concerned.
So how can they affect an individual? If their entity, I'm just going to call it an entity, which is a spirit, if they're in a home or a place of work?
Well, I mean, for one thing, the individual that's living in a house that is affected by a spirit, if it's going to be an adverse, interaction, the individual is going to be what classically is known as a highly sensitive person. So they're going to be somebody that is very sensitive to the subtler energies that are around them. And how that person is affected is completely open to, you know, it's as unique as the individual is. And this is where we start to get into the real nature of reality and what is it, and what are we doing here, and why are we like this. But fundamentally, if a person is being troubled by a spirit, they might even just feel uncomfortable, out of sorts, you know, not happy living here. I don't, you know, classically some people say, well, I bought this house, I thought I liked it, but actually I've never felt comfortable here. That can be due to spirit activity, but there are a whole host of other things that can also influence and affect a highly sensitive person in a property. When we do the house healing, and you mentioned there that we've got a house healing network, um, that the house healing network is a group of people that I've trained or a colleague of mine has trained, and there are 50 or so of us in the network now. So we've developed a network because there's a need for this sort of work at the moment. Now, this is probably something to do with where Earth is in its journey through the cosmos, and the energies that we're going through is affecting all of us. And there's, you know, you can't deny that there's some kind of awakening going on, and that's what's happening, is that we're all becoming far more sensitive to the subtle realms. So when we do a house healing, there's a list of 50 or so section headings that we actually look at and analyze and ask questions about. And what we're doing is we're using dowsing to interrogate the energy of the space, what's present, what is adversely affecting the individual that owns that home or place of work. And then we're asking the management, the higher echelons of creation, if you like. Some people just call it spirit, but I use this term, the management. So we ask the management about what the information is. So they give us the information. As a house healer, we're simply sitting and bringing this out into our three-dimensional realm through dowsing, as I say, and we write up a report. And then what we do is we sit in meditation, we sit in that healing space, ask the management to affect the individual. So in other words, if a person is being badly affected by adverse spirits, we are basically asking the management to, you know, kindly move those spirits on and take them through to the light if that's appropriate for the rest of their journey, so that they are no longer affecting the individual. And that kind of process, interacting with an open heart and with that compassion, seems to be most of the time enough to actually affect a subtle change for the individual.
That's just amazing. I mean, I love it. Maybe I need that. No, I'm fine. But do you also look at the energy of the land? You spoke about guardians of the land. So not only the actual dwelling, but the land the home sits on?
Yeah, I mean, broadly speaking, we're looking at several different areas of subtle energy. So we look at the personal energy of the person as well. That's one of the first things that we do, just look at and remove attachments and all this sort of thing, the general day-to-day rubbish that, you know, everybody picks up, but some people are more affected by. So we look at personal subtle energy. We'll quite often do a balancing process on the chakras as well, just to aid, you know, and support energy change. We'll look at the energy of the house itself, the space that they're living in. And part of that is to look at the energy of the land, and earth energy itself as a concept comes into that kind of category. We also look at historical activity and emotional activity that's been left on that space as well. But the one that really fascinates me is actually the whole kind of healing aspect of earth energy, and what are these earth energy lines that people often call ley lines, what it is that those things are, and how are we affected by them. And we can talk a little bit about that if you like.
Sure. So I was going to ask you, what's your advice if someone feels that they have something in their home, or perhaps their behaviors changed or emotions in some way? What's your advice?
Well, I mean, so it would be easy for me to say, well, what you need to do is to get onto one of us in the house healing network, and we'll do a dowsing evaluation
Yeah.
of what's going on. That is one way, but the real excitement, work, passion for this is actually in helping the person understand their relationship to the energy that they're experiencing, because that's when that's when you get the real fundamental shifts, because part of this process that we're all going through, this process of everybody waking up, is waking up to what is it that we truly are, which is that spiritual being having the human experience. And so therefore we ask the question of, well, what is this human experience? What is this interaction that is troubling me? What is this showing? What is this illustrating? What is this highlighting? Why am I, why is this person getting this now? And in helping them understand what that picture is about, which we do really through, it's what comes up from the management, what the management is showing us. And when we're talking to the individual client, it's revealed sometimes in conversation as well, some of the issues that are facing the person. But in understanding that there's this whole raft of influences that is really affecting, it really is affecting the subconscious more almost than the conscious. The bit that comes into the conscious awareness of the individual is really the tip of the iceberg. It's the subconscious effects, and that's where we are creating our reality from, is our subconscious programming. So really we start to really kind of shake the box and try to help that understanding for the client as much as possible. I can't remember what your question was, but I seem to have gone off into.
No, that was perfect. What should one do? And you kind of explained that it's holistic. You keep saying management. What do you mean by management? The management.
The management is a term that my dear old mentor Hamish Miller used. Hamish Miller, if anybody wants to Google him, was a philanthropist and a metal worker. He was a fantastic human being. He died in 2010. I had the pleasure of working with him for the last 7 years of his life. He had a tremendous impact on so many people, because he was a guy that co-wrote a book that many people have read about earth energy, which is The Sun and the Serpent. And that's the story of Hamish Miller and Paul Broadhurst, his co-author. Their travels, they took 10 years to actually douse earth energy lines across the south of England. And this story of discovery is told in that book. And Hamish Miller used this term, the management, to refer to, he used it to refer to the upper echelons of creation. So those energies that are personalities that are very, very close to the ultimate creator. Hamish had a near-death experience. If only had a couple, but he has one that is the most recorded, I guess, and the one that he talked about the most, where he was on an operating table and he died, and he went upstairs and he met the management, and he had the whole kind of classic NDE discussion about, well, do you want to stay or do you want to go back to Earth? And the management showed him some examples of their concepts at that level, and he said, I just don't understand those, I think I better go back. And they apparently laughed and said, yes, I think we think you should too. So he came back to Earth, and his NDE completely changed him from being an award-winning manufacturer of furniture, is what he used to do. He stepped out of that life and he became a blacksmith, which is what he'd always wanted to do since he was about 8 years old. But the thing was that he was then passionate about helping people understand that they are connected to the management, and the management are connected to us, and effectively we are a fractal of God, as the expression is that other people use. But the management, as far as I'm concerned, is the term that I use to represent really all of those personalities that are the other side of the veil, that are there that will help us if we ask them to help us. It's all of those energies of creation that go towards the manifesting process, our experience of creation, because we are the babies here, we're the kiddies, we are not the ones that know what the hell's going on. That's not a very good expression, but we manage to create hell in our sense of living our lives half the time. And part of the point of being in this dimension is to understand our responsibility of creation, and part of that understanding comes from being able to call on the help of these guides and other spiritual beings and aspects of creation, aspects of nature, understanding that actually they are a part of us and we are a part of them, and there is no separation whatsoever. So this dimension that is driven by its nature of being separate. Separation doesn't exist. There is no separation at all. And that is how and why we can communicate with these energies, and they are so present for us if we want to call on them. That is the fundamental driver behind why I refer to it as the management. It makes them very, very approachable, because they are very approachable. There are aspects of creation in the subtle realms that are not good for us, but once we understand why they're not good for us, as I've previously described, you can then step on and actually embrace the relationship to the management and understand that it's all a learning curve, and that wave that you're then on is actually going to take you to some remarkable places.
Thank you, Tim. I mean, I love the term management. That's great. I often get asked this question: how can I connect with my intuition or my guides or angels? What is your advice for the audience?
Well, I would say simply you pick up a dowsing rod or pick up a pendulum, because that is the easiest way to actually start exploring your intuitive connection to everything that is. That dowsing is a door opener.
So you
It
can
really
ask
is.
yes or no questions with the dowsing rod, almost like kinesiology.
It's very, very closely aligned to kinesiology. Kinesiology is basically the muscular movement, right? And dowsing is as far as we know, and this is the explanation that I completely go along with because it just feels right to me. As far as we're concerned, dowsing is these subconscious reaction. So it's a muscular reaction, and it's the tiny muscular movements that are moving the rods or moving the pendulum. But these are unconscious. They're completely unconscious. The dowser is oblivious to those signals that are taking place. But that's because you're accessing the subconscious intuitive response. It then gets transferred to the physical body, and it moves the needles, because these are simply meters. They're indicating a response. And so when I was talking earlier on about talking to spirits and stuff, the connection is in here, obviously, in the inner universe. And so as you connect, what you're basically doing with the dowsing rods or the pendulum is using it like a key to start the motor, so that you can actually then go into that space after a little bit of time of practice. And it does take practice to start with, and you do go through several hoops of learning. But once you do that, then you start to actually realize that the dowsing rod connection, and then you are connecting in a deliberate and intentional way. And that's that can be a game changer.
Oh, well, I'm really excited. What's the difference? And I know you mentioned before the difference between ley lines and earth lines.
Earth energy lines are a natural flow across the landscape, and they weave like rivers. So they follow very much that kind of natural flow of energy, and they they're usually found in pairs. There are all sorts of levels of earth energy, and that's what you will have discussed with Rory Duff, is that there are some huge earth energy lines, absolutely massive, but there are also really, really tiny ones. And if you relate earth energy to the Hylian system, then you know that you've got big lines of power going through the human body, but you've also got tiny ones as well. And like with the blood supply in the body, massive arteries, but you've got tiny fields of capillaries as well. And what's really, really interesting from my point of view, actually, is not the big, massive lines, which Rory is, really keen on. And these are really, there are reasons why they're really exciting and really interesting to work with. But equally, you can work with the tiny capillary field manifest in your environment. You'll have a positive and beneficial earth energy spiral vortex. You'll have several in that room that you're in. You'll have a very, very positive and beneficial one in there. And wherever your focus is for most of the day, you will find the most positive and beneficial earth energy vortex. Ley lines are not like that. Ley lines are basically straight alignments which can be traced on a you can look at a map and you can trace a ley line. You can see, if you use Alfred Watkins' definitions of the specific sacred sites or the specific objects that you're looking for over a certain fixed period of distance, then you can find a straight alignment. Now there is some kind of thought that the straight lines, the ley lines, might be aspects of earth energy which we simply aren't recognizing as they're both the same thing. Because what happens at an earth energy power center, at an earth energy vortex, which I was just talking about earlier on, was that you get the spiral, the big vortex shape that you can dowse, and it's there in a wonderful it's
Yes.
there in the classic Fibonacci spiral pattern. Yes, yes. So that sits there as a spiral, and you can dowse that spiral and you'll find that wonderful Fibonacci spacing as it expands out. But also out of that power center, you will get straight line radials being emanated, and you can dowse those and you can count those. And what's really interesting is that actually, if you sit in meditation and you send love, you send compassion to that space, the number of radials will increase. So in other words, what that illustrates, and this happens time and time again, this is not a one-off, it's completely repeatable by anybody. It's simply a matter of adjusting your vibration so that you're sending compassion / healing into that space, and earth energy reacts. So earth energy is reacting to our consciousness. And the reason for that is, as we said earlier on, there is no separation of these facets. Earth energy is a part of the conscious field of the earth, as we are. So all we're doing really is interacting with an aspect of the management, which is an aspect of us.
Thank you. Gosh, I was just thinking, amazing, amazing. But me too, forget so much in our humanness that we're separate. And our suffering and everything that goes on, we take it so seriously when we forget that we're all connected to everything.
It is an incredibly effective system that we are experiencing, because the depth of forgetting in order to be in the human form is virtually complete. It is enough to make us feel isolated completely 100%, whereas that's not our real nature. And that is part of the problem, is that because we are so able to be in that depth of isolation, in that real feeling of being separate from everything, because it's what the 3 dimensions have necessitated. And you add to that actually we are extremely programmable, then we end up with a sort of a hypnosis that has occurred over the centuries, where we just completely believe that we are these isolated individual beings, whereas we're not. And that's the paradigm shift that we're currently experiencing, is to be reconnected with everything and to understand our connection to everything. And that has an implication not only for things like we've just talked about earlier on, which is house healing, which is kind of like distance, remote connection through the quantum field at that level, but it also means that we have an intimate connection with the actual experience of our environment. So with climate crisis or climate change that some people believe is occurring at the moment, this is a difficult subject actually, which we'll just explore, if we may, a little bit. It's a difficult subject because as soon as I start to talk about this in these terms, people would accuse, they either say, well, there's no such thing as climate change, or you're a climate change denier and there's no middle ground, right? But what I'm saying is, if we believe that there is climate change, if we believe there is a climate crisis, the answer is actually in connecting to it and understanding our connection to it. Because as soon as we stop perceiving our world as this isolated lump of rock hurtling through space, and we just accept that we are beings having an experience, It's rather like being on the holodeck of the Star Trek Enterprise. It is what you make it. And therefore, we know from shamanic practice and all of those sort of subtle activities where you communicate with nature spirits and all of that aspect, that they and it and you are one, and therefore you are involved intimately in the way the weather manifests. Now, to people that are new to this concept, it sounds absurd. It sounds ridiculous. How on earth could you be affected by the weather? Tim, you're delusional. Well, actually, no, because it's part of us. It's part of the experience of being here. It's part of our connection to everything. And each individual person's experience of being connected is slightly different, which is why I say, forget about the single earth, forget about that. It's about experience in this bandwidth. It's about the experience of being here as a human being. In other words, being that spiritual being connected to everything. And that includes the weather, nature, because we are nature. That's all we are. We're just bits of it that have the ability to plan and to be organized. And we've lost our way in being able to be so organized and in that
Yes.
ability to
We
plan.
so often forget. A big congratulations. I've got one more question after this. A big
That's fine.
congratulations on your book, Spirit and Earth. Where is the best place for people to connect with you? And I will leave a link below in the show notes as well.
Best place to find me actually is on well, either www.knightsrose.com. That's KNIGHTSROSE.com, or on my YouTube channel, which you can find by digging out me, doing a search for Tim Walter, WALTER, Tim Walter Dowser or Tim Walter House Healer, will always find me. If you don't put the Dowser or the House Healer in, then you'll find some German football manager, and I don't think he'll really appreciate questions about house healing.
Okay. No, I looked at your YouTube channel the other day. It's great. So I encourage everyone to have a look at it. On a final note, and this is my final question, in the concepts of time, are we living in a simulation?
Yeah.
I'm trying to make it easy for you.
I know, it's fine.
You're a wealth of information.
But it's a great question, and it's a lovely question. It's brilliant because it actually echoes back to the conversation of that we were having just now about our connection to nature and about the world around us. And I suppose when I think it was Neil deGrasse Tyson, wasn't it, that was famously said to say, the chances are that we do live in a simulation. Chances are we are in a product of some other civilization's manufacture. And my response actually was like, does it matter? Does it actually matter? Because really, it doesn't change what we're here to do. It doesn't change as long as we recognize that simulation is created for our benefit. Okay, so the big crucial paradigm shift is about understanding the role of your heart in the creative process, in the creation process. Now, if we live in a simulation, and that simulation has been developed so that we are energies that learn, and part of that learning is to understand our heart, then what we're doing is learning compassion, and we're learning that unity, and that enables us to take another step forward in whatever the future paths are that we manifest in. Part of the learning is to understand and have that humility and that compassion. And one of the aspects that is not in harmony with that concept of humility and compassion is the idea that everybody's out to get me. The idea that the world is a terrible place, and that there is nothing in this world that is of any good. And every time I turn a corner, I'm faced by problems and evil and wrongdoings and control and all the rest of it. Now, given that we've said that everybody lives in their own unique world, because that's basically what we've been alluding to, is that you're in your own vibration, in your own bandwidth, in your own experience of being alive. if you choose to accept that the world is a terrible place, then that's exactly what you'll see, and that's exactly what you'll experience. And therefore, healing is simply a matter of changing that paradigm shift to see that no, it's not. Or the fact is, no, it doesn't have to be. Because to the person that sees the world like that, it is like that, because that's what's being created. That's what the resonance is. Once you live from the heart and see it as a much more wonderful place. I nearly said wonderfuler. I don't think there's such a word as wonderfuler. It's such a wonderful place. Then actually every single experience changes to be far more wonderful as a result of that. And it's a very simple process of allowing the heart to do the job that it's supposed to do, which is to connect with compassion in every circumstance that you're able to connect with compassion.
Absolutely. And our consciousness creates our reality.
100%.
And the heart. I have to remember that one. On a final note, Tim, I've loved having you on Passion Harvest. Is there anything you'd like to share with the Passion Harvest audience that I haven't asked you today?
The point is that actually we can live very simply. It's so simple to live, and to always try to remember to refer to what would love do in this circumstance when we meet a problem, when we meet a difficult person, blah, 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 or any of those things. It's always about connecting to the heart and understanding that compassion is absolutely the key. It's not even about necessarily thinking about consciousness as a concept. It's just aligning to the feeling of being compassionate.
Beautiful. Thank you, Tim. And you've inspired me so much to find my dowsing rods that are somewhere in the house. Thank you for being on Passion Harvest.
Thank you for having me. It's been great.
It's a pleasure. Bye-bye. If you liked this episode, please do subscribe.